Tonight, Athens City Council is holding two public hearings at 7 o'clock. The first public hearing is regarding an amendment to our current sign regulations for murals on public property, which says they must be recommended by the Municipal Arts Commission and approved by City Council. Member Patterson?
The only thing I would add to that is that it takes the mayor out of the approval mix and makes it the Arts Commission and the City Council. City Council asked to be retained in that process. And that's the whole question.
The discussion is about the amendment to our current sign regulations. Is there anybody here who would like to speak to that? Okay, thank you. We will move on to the second public hearing.
Wait a second, don't you have to wait till
We have to wait till
7:15?
I just asked that, and they said we didn't need to, but
Okay.
it is scheduled at 7:15, and I really did think somebody was going to be here tonight.
Oh, well,
so-
we probably
Yeah, we'll
will
wait.
wait.
Okay, we'll wait. So we will adjourn until 7:15. Thank you. Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you, Amy. It's 7:15. Athens City Council is holding our second public hearing of the evening. This one is in regards to an amendment to the schedule of bulk controls, Table A, to change the current height limitation in the B2D zone from 75 feet or 6 stories to 50 feet or 4 stories. Councilmember Phillips, this is your committee.
This comes to us on a recommendation from the Planning Commission, and it was something that we requested that the Planning Commission look at. In the past, the Planning Commission has recommended that all of Court Street be changed to the B2D zone, and in our discussion about that, the building height that's allowed in the B2D was one of the main concerns that came up among council members. So we asked the Planning Commission to take a look at this. They've made this recommendation to us that the height limitation should be changed to not allow buildings to be 75 feet tall in the B2D. And I believe that we've already had, we're going to be at first reading on this the next time we meet. The piece that we have not come back to is the actual change of the zone. So where the line is going to go and all of that. When the Planning Commission made their recommendation about changing the zoning, the Planning Commission basically said to council, you figure out where the line should go. So we'll be talking about that at the committee meeting next week. And this is a public hearing, an opportunity for people to talk to us about the change in bulk controls.
Wait a minute, we'll come back to you.
Okay.
Anybody in the audience have a comment or a question about this issue? Council members?
And we will have the full process for the rezoning of the B3 zone to B2D, and that will require 3 readings and a public hearing as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Virginia?
Is there anything currently under construction or planned that is above 4 stories? Is anything slipping in?
No.
No, okay.
There are, if you remember, Steve Pearson put together a list of non-conforming buildings at this time, but there are just a few of them, I believe. I know
But they're
Bromley
all-
Hall was one,
Yeah,
and I forget the other 2. There were at least 2 other ones.
There were, yeah, I think 3, but I don't
but they're
have it with
existing.
me.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
Member Phillips, if we proceed with this change to bulk controls, that changes this height limitation in the current, within the current boundaries of the B2D zone. Okay. But that's all. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I think that completes our second public hearing. Council meets at 7:30. We will adjourn now and come back at 7:30. Thank you.
Point out the absurdity by not voting.
Okay,
Yin
there you
and
go.
yang of the-
Okay, ordinances for second reading. 01807, an ordinance amending Athens City Code, Title 7, Traffic Code, Section 7.09.99. Ordinance 023, Ordinance 02307, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to execute a housing revolving loan fund administration agreement with the State of Ohio Department of Development. Council members, I introduced this. I would, at this time, like to move that we consider this ordinance under suspension of the rules.
Second.
When we introduced this 2 weeks ago, it was with the statement that no funds are available for this particular agreement to effect. However, we got a call from Mr. Stanley at Tri-County Community Action Agency, who administers this. And although he did not say that there are funds available, he did say that the Governor's Office of Appalachia had called and said they need this ordinance soon. So it's the recommendation of our administrator that we pass this as soon as possible. Any questions about suspension of the rules?
No.
All those in favor of suspending the rules on 02307?
Aye.
Those opposed? Rules are suspended. I move adoption of ordinance 2307
Second.
for those reasons we just talked about. Any questions or comments from the council members? Paul?
I see in section 1, it says for the period beginning January 1st, 2007.
So actually, we're
We're a little behind.
Yes.
And this is a 2-year
Yeah,
commitment.
209, yeah.
Yes. And it simply extends an agreement that we've been involved in for as long as we've been involved with the CHIP program, several years.
Several years, okay.
Any comments from the audience? All those in favor of ordinance 2307?
Aye.
Those opposed? Passes 6-0. Thank you. Ordinance 2407, an ordinance authorizing the auditor of the City of Athens to make interfund transfers in the 2007 appropriation ordinance and declaring an emergency. Now we have ordinances for first reading. Ordinance 2707, an ordinance granting a variance from the Athens City subdivision regulations excuse me, to Mark Wayner for property located outside the corporate limits but within the 3-mile jurisdiction to allow a minor subdivision, introduced by Councilmember Phillips.
Mr. President, this ordinance does exactly what it says. It would grant a variance from subdivision regulations. It came to us on a recommendation from the Planning Commission. When we discussed it in committee, we had one question, which was about how close this property is to the exit ramp from 33 onto Route 682. And so we did ask for documentation from ODOT that it was going to be acceptable for this property, that would have road frontage onto 682 to be able to have access to that road frontage. And we do have that letter now. I have a copy of it. I don't know if everyone received this, but I can make copies if anybody needs it.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from council members? From anybody in the audience? Comments or questions? Okay. This ordinance has been read for the first time. Ordinance 2807, an ordinance authorizing the law director to enter into a professional legal services contract on behalf of the City of Athens related to claims against several lead-based paint and lead manufacturers in order to remediate the hazards in the City of Athens, introduced by the Environment Committee.
Do you think we should suspend rules on this?
We should. May I
Okay.
speak to it?
Go for it.
Mr. President, I move that we consider 02807 under suspension of council rules.
Second.
The reason for the suspension is that the deadline to file this lawsuit to protect people from this public nuisance is the beginning of April, and the attorneys would like to file by March 31st, so we do need to get this moving fairly quickly.
Okay. Other questions or comments by council members? All those in favor of suspension of the rules?
Aye.
Mr. President, I move adoption of 02807.
Second.
This ordinance authorizes the law director to enter into a contract for this litigation around lead paint. There are a number of cities in Ohio that are party to a lawsuit that basically is trying to seek some funds to remediate the hazards of lead paint. It was known that lead paint is a health hazard since about 1900, and yet many paint companies continued using and marketing paint that had significant quantities of lead until the 1970s. It was banned in 1978. Because we have a lot of older housing stock in Athens, we do have homes that could have a lead paint hazard, and the age of the paint is such that it's starting to deteriorate. There can be lead paint dust in the air in homes. This will not cost us anything to participate. This contract is on a contingency basis. The lawyers believe that identifying the homes that have a lead paint hazard is part of the remedy to clean up and remediate that hazard. So the documentation of which homes actually need lead paint remediation, that cost would be borne by the companies if we're successful in the litigation. If the Attorney General decides to join the suit, then this will become irrelevant. If the entire state decides to join the suit, then the individual cities wouldn't be going forward. But if the Attorney General does not join the suit, then we would be together with Canton and Massillon and a number of other municipalities in Ohio that have filed.
Toledo, Akron, Canton, it says.
Yeah.
Or Patterson, whoever wants to go.
I just had a question. In reading this material, it seemed to me that our law office might have some responsibility in terms of organization or accessibility. Is that correct? Would we have some hours put in by our law office?
I don't know how much time it would require. Our law director would be part of the litigation so that
Right.
we could have some decision-making authority around the lawsuit, but won't have to be doing the work of the suit. The only potential cost that I'm aware of to us would be if there's a public records request for documents related to lead. We may have some staff time in actually compiling any documentation that exists about the lead hazards in the city. And there may come a time when some city employees would be deposed, but that's the only cost that I would see. Any costs of actually gathering evidence and all of that would be part of the contingency payment.
Follow up on that. I assume that the law director and the mayor's office have both looked at this and said, okay.
Yes.
For a while.
I'd like to thank Debbie for bringing it to our attention. I'm glad you're looking past the city limits and following this stuff.
Comments or questions from the audience? All those in favor of ordinance 2807?
Aye.
Those opposed? 6-0, this passes. Ordinance 2907, an ordinance amending the 2007 appropriation ordinance, introduced by Councilmember Weil.
This essentially is appropriation for the enhancement fund, Athens enhancement, to add some money to it, mostly for the plaques for the West State Street Cemetery area. And we're talking about the paint program too, which is the assistance to homeowners who apply for a aid in painting their house. So we're trying to just beef up that fund.
Any other questions or comments? Patterson.
I just wondered if there, to your knowledge, if there's been any follow-up to a Veterans Association or,
Not that I know.
I mean,
of.
I can do that if that's,
At the committee meeting with Abel, Rick was saying he was going to do
Right.
it. No.
have you done it yet? Mayor
Mayor.
Pius?
Get on that, right, okay.
I know there's been some discussion on the west side because we have some funds and, you know, whether to give it back to them or put it to the city. And I think right now the consensus is to pass it to the city, yeah. But no, but I don't, as far as I know, they haven't been approached.
Ordinance 3007, an ordinance repealing ordinance O-12503, closing a portion of Court and Washington Streets on the second Sunday of each month from April through November to accommodate farmers market and local artisans, introduced by Councilmember Patterson.
Mr. President, the purpose of this ordinance is to get rid of an obsolete ordinance to make way for the new ordinance, and this was left open-ended with no end date. It wasn't a specific year, and so we just need to get it off of the books.
Any other questions? Thank you. Ordinance 3107, an ordinance closing a portion of East State Street on the first Saturday in May, July, and October 2007 to accommodate farmers market and local artisans, introduced by Councilmember Patterson.
Mr. President, this is the other ordinance to establish a schedule for this year. It was suggested that perhaps we leave it open-ended again. However, when Debbie Walker and I sat down to write the ordinance, it was clear that this was the only way to do it and to have a yearly ordinance. This closes the East State Street on the first Saturday of May, July, and October, and then there are two other dates where we will go with another street closing, so we don't have to be involved in the actual street closing process. I've had some great conversations with the Uptown business folks about this. They're enthusiastic, and we're going to try yet another plan.
What portion of East State Street are you talking about?
This would be between Stevens and Domino's.
Says College and
That-
Court,
yes.
East State Street.
Just that little triangular piece, the far side of the triangle.
East, I guess, right?
It's
Yeah.
East State, the north side of East State Street there, yes.
Member Bishop?
So this moves these markets from a Sunday to a Saturday,
Correct.
which also means, now, is it going to be the same farmers that tend to be at the regular farmers market?
This is later, so they could do both if they want to.
It's later in the day?
Right.
I see, okay.
And for some of them, they kind of like that idea of finish there and just come on
Okay.
down. And
So this
join
is
us.
like 1 or something?
Right.
Okay,
1 o'clock, exactly.
okay.
Other comments or questions? Thank you. Ordinance 3207, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into capital improvement project agreements with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources and declaring an emergency, introduced by Councilmember Patterson.
Mr. President, this ordinance, I move to suspend the rules on 03207.
Second.
The reason for the suspension is that this report is due back to the state by April 1st. Yes.
Is that a good reason?
Questions at this point about the suspension of the rules? All those in favor of suspending the rules on ordinance 3207?
Aye.
Opposed? 6-0, the rules are suspended.
Mr. President, I move for adoption of 03207.
Second.
What this is an ordinance to accept money from ODNR. It is a grant. It is for the soccer complex. And in order for the, to receive the money, it must be signed by the mayor and the law director. And in order for them to sign it, it's got to go through as an ordinance. So that's why we are doing this. It's to get money.
The amount, you know?
75,000.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Oh,
So this is for the 4 or 5 soccer fields there, and to do what with them? Just fix them up?
General, I mean, they're not completed. Right now, it's
No,
just
dirt.
a field.
Okay.
Members of the audience, questions or comments? Thank you. Oh, let's move on. We've had a second for this ordinance. All those in favor of ordinance 3207?
Aye.
Those opposed?
Did we vote for suspension?
Yes.
Yes, we did do that,
Okay, thank you.
but then I forgot about it.
Okay,
So, okay.
Okay.
We did pass it, 6.
okay.
Thank you. Ordinance 3307, an ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director to execute a building and rooftop lease agreement with New Par, doing business as Verizon Wireless. Introduced by Councilmember Bain, but I believe Councilmember Bishop is going to introduce it.
Yes, I believe we talked about this several times in committee, that we already lease out, and Ray, I'm going to ask you to speak to this too, some portions of the rooftop of the parking garage. And this is an ordinance that would allow a couple of more spaces to be leased out for this equipment. Do you want to speak to it in any more detail than that, or?
No, currently, we lease out the top of basically what is the west and the east stairwells for an antenna.
Right.
And this is from another company, to lease another portion of the top floor of the parking garage. It'll use about 4 spaces, and they'll construct an antenna and receiving equipment up there, and we'll receive about $1,700 a month for that.
Okay, thank you. And I think in committee, we discussed that there was actually still income from there's still some parking spaces available when needed on the
Yes.
roof because of that. Yes.
Member Wild?
And if I remember that the money is going to go to the parking debt fund, right? The
Is
parking
that-
garage fund.
It goes into the parking garage fund. It's an enterprise fund, so any money we take in has to go
Yes.
towards the parking garage.
Okay.
Right.
Debt reduction or maintenance.
This also goes back to the fact that we no longer have a 24/7 full garage, and so when that freed up that top floor, it made this possible, and at this point, we're taking in a healthy balance each month from these rentals.
Right.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you. Now we have some resolutions for third reading. Resolution 0107, a resolution accepting the Athens Parks and Recreation 2007-2011 strategic plan, introduced by Councilmember Patterson.
Mr. President, I move adoption of R0107.
Second.
Mr. President, this resolution is to adopt the Athens strategic plan for the Parks and Recreation. And as I've mentioned before, in the copies that you received, there were appendices in the back that just showed dreams. The actual plan is this part of it that just is the goals and objectives, and there They're fairly broad. And I will say one thing about the Parks and Recreation Department, very soon to be Arts, Parks and Recreation, I presume. And that is that they've done an amazing job of bringing in grants monies and paid for a lot of programs through those grant fundings. And Kevin Swartzoff is largely responsible for writing all those grants. And Emily at Arts West also writes grants continuously. As a matter of fact, today she told me that she has already reached the dollar amount goal for the entire year in March for Arts West. So that's really outstanding.
Any other comments regarding this resolution? All those in favor of Resolution 0107?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 6-0. Resolution is accepted. Resolution 0207, a resolution renaming Athens Parks and Recreation to Athens Community Arts Parks and Recreation, introduced by Councilmember Patterson.
Mr. President, I move adoption of R0207.
Second.
This is to rename this department to better suit the responsibilities that they currently are taking on with programming for the arts as well as Parks and Recreation. And I had to do a little dramatic thing because I had the preview shirt on tonight. Arts, Parks, and Recreation. So they jumped the gun just a little bit, but I'm excited about this rename.
Yeah, okay.
No giggling.
You didn't see the close-up.
Oh,
This young man is responsible. I assume that Arts, Parks, and Recreation are simply in alphabetical order. Has nothing to
well,
do with-
it was more
It flows.
alliterative that way. You know, we played around with, and Paul made fun of, you know, what we might come up with if we did it in a different order, so we're quite happy.
Okay,
And it wasn't me. I didn't say, arts needs to be first.
okay. Any other questions or comments regarding this resolution, Paul?
I'm glad we're expanding it to arts. It's good because it does reflect what's going on.
Thank you.
Audience? All those in favor of Resolution 0207?
Aye.
Accepted 6-0. Now we have two one-reading resolutions. Resolution 0307, a resolution to reduce global warming emissions, introduced by the Environment Committee. Chairman Wise.
I move adoption of R0307.
Second.
This is a resolution to reduce global warming emissions. There's a long preamble here, which I shall actually, if you will choose, I can read some of it or all of it. Part of it is that we are aware that, well, okay, I'll read the first one. We'll start with that. Whereas the City of Athens views global warming as a serious threat and wishes to be proactive in doing its part to reduce greenhouse gas pollution, currently the city is reducing its greenhouse gas emissions through curbside recycling, upgrading traffic lights that use less electricity, synchronizing traffic flow, and conversion of a city truck to run on waste grease. The City of Athens views these first steps in fighting global warming. There are more preambles and whereases. Essentially, we're trying to do is agree that we're going to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and our energy use over time. The goals, which would be in the first, let's see, which would be in the first section 1, the City of Athens will work towards reducing its greenhouse gas emissions by 10% below the 1990 levels by 2017. The city believes that energy efficiency can achieve this goal as well as save substantial money and create economic benefit. The goals here are to reduce the amount of energy we use, both in the public and private sector. It's fairly easy to do in many cases, especially with our older housing stock. Again, we're taking steps all the time towards it, whether we just discussed earlier this evening. The commitment will be is to join the ICLEI which is basically a group that will provide benchmarking for this type of stuff and do an audit. Hopefully, we'll be able to do an audit of how much energy we use within the city. This was brought forward by the Sierra Club, who brought it to the attention of both the mayor, and he in turn talked to his administration about it. And now we're included in the loop as well, because that's the best way it works. Remember, go for it.
I know. I support this because I think it's an important, not only statement, but also service to the world. Right? But I am curious in terms of administering it and making sure that we live up to these things. I know we've heard from Sierra Club, and they actually offered to do some data analysis. But I'd kind of like to hear from Ray in terms of these actual steps that we would take. Your sense of whether or not administratively we can basically live up to these things.
Well, I guess in terms of the steps that we would take, this would be an extension of the natural process where you want to look for more economical methods to operate.
Okay.
And in a sense, this is an extension of that. And the representatives from the Sierra Club that came to staff meetings and talked to us about this process, one of the real benefits of entering into this agreement is that they have some expertise and some resources that they can put at our disposal to assist us in that evaluation process, so that it's not one of the things where we're committing to commit a lot of additional man hours that we don't have. It's we're committing to participate with this group who are willing to assist us in accomplishing those goals.
Well, I just wanted to make sure that when we pass this resolution, that we're not overcommitting the city and that we can actually carry out the agreements.
One statement that the mayor made at our staff meeting is he is seeking a commitment from each department head in this process, and that he is not interested in signing on board for a program unless we're committed to accomplishing it. So.
Right. So we feel we can.
Yes.
Great. Okay. Excellent. Good.
I just wonder, I don't know, if we can amend our comprehensive plan and include this in there, and then it become part of the benchmarking and citizen review program that goes along with the plan. That's a second part of this. That's not what we're doing tonight. Is another way of making sure that it doesn't go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't see why not. I know this last, the committee meeting that we were discussing this, where we talked about the LEEDs standards for greenhouse and green emission type stuff, in terms of incorporating that into our building standards in the future. And I thought that was received by council fairly well. So, again, the comprehensive plan is supposed to be a living document, and it's supposed to shift over time as we choose.
First of all, kudos to the Environmental Committee for bringing this forward. I know that the Sierra Club's been having meetings for a while, and I have attended several of those, and a lot of what's in our document is straight from their material. Some of it's not a perfect fit, but a lot of it is, and it strikes me how much of it is already in the comprehensive plan and really is very specific. And to me, this is what council's supposed to do with the comprehensive plan, find ways to make laws that uphold what's in the comprehensive plan. So I feel like this is just a huge step, and certainly can be something that we can use as a model for a long time.
And build on.
Other council members? Members of the audience, comments or questions?
My name is Greg Broadhurst. I live at 14 Granville Avenue. As an environmental professional, I'm very happy to hear this resolution come forth, and I totally encourage that you support it and pass the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. All those in favor of Resolution 0307? Aye. Opposed? Okay, this resolution is adopted, 6-0. A second one-reading resolution, 0407, a resolution in support of Ohio University's off-campus living office, introduced by all council members, but I believe Ms. Patterson is going to speak to that.
I am. I mentioned this, I move to adopt, whatever number it is. 0407.
Second.
This resolution is to be sent forward to the university to encourage them to maintain the programming of the off-campus housing office. Jim Hintz is leaving the university, and so we were fearful that perhaps they would say, well, this would be a good time to cut it back. And I know other pleas are coming from other entities to support this program. Debbie Walker and I came up with the whereases with some input from Ray as well, and Ray is a co-chair of the Community University Relations
Civility
Committee.
Committee.
That's not
Civic-
quite the title.
Yeah, Civic Responsibility Committee, yeah.
Civic Responsibility Committee, and so I sat down with him to get some of that language because I knew that was something they had discussed as well.
I would just add that this recommendation came from that Civic Responsibility Task Force to create this office, and I think we've seen some really positive trends coming out of that. I think that there's more communication happening, and it's really important to help folks transition into living in neighborhoods and help students know where they can get information, and just, I think that it has really eased some of the tensions that were evident in some of the neighborhoods, so it's really beneficial. I hope we can keep it going.
Member Wise?
I think it is a good idea, and I'm glad that we're doing this. I hope it actually expands as well as keeping it going. Having attended that audio conference, one of the things they point out is the perseverance in this type of activity and continuity if we want to have some kind of results in terms of better communication between the city and the students.
Other comments? All those in favor of Resolution 0407?
Aye.
Opposed? The resolution is accepted, 6-0. Announcements and other business. Member Patterson?
Under the minutes.
Mr. President,
Okay.
oh, I'm sorry, you have business.
Well, I do, but I thought maybe we'd do the announcements first, but should I do this
Why don't you do that first?
Okay. Mr. President, I move to remove O-132-06 from the table.
Second.
Mr. President,
We need,
we need,
all those in favor of removing ordinance O-132-06 from the table?
Aye.
Okay.
Honest, I was just going to discuss removing it from the table.
Were you? Okay.
It's been on and off and on and off,
Okay.
but anyway. Mr. President, I move adoption of O-132-06.
Second.
This is the mural ordinance, and it was the subject of the public hearing. This whole process started some time ago, and then I believe it was Debbie pointed out to us that we needed a hearing on the Planning Commission level and then a hearing on the council level, and so it's been quite an arduous task. The only additional point that I might make is that the Arts Commission has developed a policy for processing murals, which they forwarded to the law director, and so they will be providing you with copies of what their policies will be, and I think that will help council in their input.
So this is essentially a process for us to approve it, as well as a restriction to just public walls rather than private walls.
Correct. Yes, that was the other change that, thank you for reminding us of that, because that was illegality as well.
I have a question about that. Our sign ordinance limits the size and, you know, the percentage of a building face that can have a sign on it. If a private building, if they want to paint a mural, does that come into conflict with our sign ordinance? And
The way that it's written in the sign ordinance is that murals are an exception.
Okay.
So they're treated totally differently.
okay.
Are murals defined not to have advertising logos in them?
That's part of what we're working on, is a definition. That's not in this proposal, but that is something that we've been contacting other cities concerning, and so far we don't get involved in that. So we may have to create our own.
Okay.
Member Fisher?
Okay, so does this mean then that if a private owner wanted to paint something on the side of his or her building, it's not covered in any of our,
That is correct.
so we would have no,
It's a legal issue, and that
Okay.
was something that originally I had in there, public and private, and ran it by the law director, and
he said,
he
no
said
way.
no.
Okay.
Member Bly?
Someday I want to cover some graffiti laws, and this eventually will blend into that.
I agree, and to me, this partially addresses that, because graffiti is not an approved mural, and it is vandalism, and needs to be addressed that way. I'm hoping that if we pass the ordinance concerning the fines, the parking fines, so that we can hire additional officers, that maybe we can get a little more savvy about catching some of the graffiti artists and getting that stopped. It's happening on both public and private property.
I'm aware of it.
Other questions or comments? All those in favor of accepting ordinance O-13206?
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, this ordinance is accepted 6-0. Now, other announcements and Member Phillips.
Mr. President, I'll need to have a Planning and Development Committee meeting next week to discuss the rezoning of part of Court Street. And I got some feedback about site plan review, so that'll be on the agenda, and miscellaneous. And I also need to make a plea for people to apply to be on the Comprehensive Plan Review and Advisory Commission. We don't have enough applicants, so I'm extending the deadline to April 15th. If anyone is interested, the clerk has copies of the application. I have it electronically. I'll email it to you. Just let me know.
Member Bishop?
Okay, a communications committee meeting next week to discuss again the telephone and networking system. And also, there'll be a report by the Community Relations Commission and miscellaneous.
Member Wild?
I think Amy had it first. She's got a hand up first.
I need a transportation committee meeting, Stewart Street and handicap parking.
Environment
Paul.
Committee, I want to look at trying to concern the litter laws and see if we can toughen them up a little bit.
Right on.
Well, we were talking about the 18 inches off the curb concept, and if we're going to have a litter control officer in training.
Right.
Member Sands? Not at this moment.
No.
Now we have an opportunity for citizens to speak on legislative items and city services not covered on our agenda. Great. You need to introduce yourself again, please.
My name is Greg Broadhurst. I live at 14 Granville Avenue in Athens. I have a couple matters concerned that related. First of them having to do with the lease of a RF emitter on the rooftop of the city garage. Has anyone, or is it in the lease? I haven't had a chance to look at it, and there's not an attorney here. Have you had a chance to see what
Yeah,
the,
this was already dealt with.
I didn't hear any call for comments on that point.
I believe I did, I'm sorry. Yeah, this is,
Okay, as a sidebar, then
Issues that have
I'd like to express my concern about the proliferation of RF emitting devices in terms of cell phone towers around the city of Athens without environmental impact statements.
thank you.
There
Is there
is,
something else?
there is, yeah, I mean, this is not exactly, this is connected with this, but I'm just saying that I went away last year for a few months to work out east, and I came back, and I think there was like 3 more cell phone towers than when I had left, between May and August. So it seemed. And I just want to know what the process is, and I'll find out further about that, and if city council weighs in on each individual installation, because there are issues with the health, safety, and welfare of people when it comes to RF emissions, even to the point that I know that cell phone emissions, or I should say, the devices are not insured by Lloyd's of London. If you look it up on the internet, you can find out why. Thank you.
Any other comment? Hearing none, we are adjourned.